Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
At the Boise Art Museum right now, there are almost 1,000 hand-painted plates on display. The blue and white dishes show detailed illustrations of comfort foods like spaghetti and pancakes and hamburgers, the last meals of death row inmates.
You have to wonder what kind of life they lived for that to be the case.
I'm Julie Luqueta. Find my report and pictures of the Last Supper exhibit at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. 2025 was a momentous year in medicine. There were outbreaks of measles and the bird flu, as well as mpox, screwworm, botulism, and whooping cough. And the use of GLP-1 drugs exploded. And breakthroughs in Alzheimer's research gave some hope to millions of Americans. And the second Trump administration made waves in how we're approaching medicine. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for our year in review. Dr. Roundtable with Dr. David Pate. He is the former CEO of St. Luke's Health System and the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak. Hi, Dr. Pate.
Hi, Gemma.
Okay, Dr. Pate, we're going to go all the way back about 11 months ago to January because we started the year off, 2025, with a quademic of viruses that spread in the United States. We had COVID, we had the flu, we had RSV, and we had norovirus with, a little bird flu thrown in there. And this really dominated the health news until February when we learned about a bird flu infecting dairy cows in Nevada. But it was, I believe, February 26th when officials in Lubbock, Texas, confirmed the death of an unvaccinated school-age child, and this happened because of the measles. And by March, there were more than 300 cases in 3 states. So, Dr. Pate, can we talk a little bit about the measles outbreak that hit the United States this last year and where we are now with it?
Well, unbelievably, we are still having more and more outbreaks. They're announcing new states all the time. I think the most recent state I just heard was Connecticut, but there was an outbreak in Utah, in one of the Carolinas, I think South Carolina. And so it continues. We now, just to put it in perspective, the number of measles cases last year was slightly less than 300. We now are over 1,700. I think we may be close to 1,800. And as you and I discussed, we are at danger of losing our measles elimination certification because if you have the same virus, and we have confirmed that the same strain that started the outbreak off, the national outbreak off out in Texas, is the one that's popping up in these new states. All that's left is that we need to show that there's an epidemiologic connection between the strains, and I think we'll have that before long. And for that to last a year, and if that happens, and it looks by all indications that is going to happen, we will lose our status in the next couple of months, probably. It's a real shame. I never could have imagined this prior to the most recent history of these outbreaks, because measles is a disease that we had eliminated from the United States. We have very effective and safe vaccines, yet here we are.
So, Dr. Pate, you said that these newest strains or these newest measles cases are the same strain that we saw in Texas all the way back in February and March. So what does that mean in terms of the virus, not going away anytime soon?
Yeah, what it means is, number one, that there is so-called community spread, which means that it is out circulating it in our country. That is to distinguish it from usually when we had cases, prior to this, the past year or so, they were mostly people that had traveled to other parts of the world and then came
Mhm.
back and they were infected that way. What this shows is that's not what's going on here. We do have some of those cases, but that's not explaining for all of our cases. It means that we have spread right here in the United States, and it means that we have enough susceptible individuals across our country in all these states where we had the outbreaks that are not vaccinated and not protected, that this virus, here we are, almost a year later, and it is still causing outbreaks.
I want to move now to April of 2025 because this also brought a host of viruses, and flu season was one of the deadliest that we saw in Idaho since 2018. So we were at that time also talking about invasive strep, but April and May saw the real start of this year's collision between politics and medicine. And you remember this, Dr. Pate. So ivermectin was about to be sold over the counter in Idaho. President Trump nominated Dr. Casey Means as the next U.S. Surgeon General, and Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was facing widespread criticism after calling autism, and I'm quoting him, an epidemic. So I want to pause for a minute. I want to talk a little bit about some of the medical recommendations or the changes coming out of the Trump administration. And there have been many. So let's start with last spring, Dr. Pate, and walk us through some of these recommendations.
Yeah, it's been exasperating because we had the Secretary of Health and Human Services come out, and we had the president come out on national networks and say, don't take Tylenol or don't take acetaminophen if you're pregnant. And saying that it was very dangerous and saying they had linked it to autism. And in fact, we know from studies that there was correlation, but no evidence for causation. And after the president and the secretary scared pregnant women, when this is one of the few options they have to control fever or pain during their pregnancy, then the secretary admitted, well, no, he didn't have any evidence for that statement. So this created this uproar across the country. And of course, you and I discussed it, that it did not need to be. And we really don't need the president or the secretary to announce health issues. We really ought to have doctors do that. But anyway, that was just one. Another change was that they changed the recommendation for COVID vaccines such that there was a question of whether it would be covered by insurance for people under the age 65 unless they had comorbid conditions that would justify it. And the problem is that decision was not warranted. The data shows that the vaccines overall are safe. Now, remember, when we say safe and effective, that doesn't mean it's that nobody can have a reaction. And of course, some people do. And it doesn't mean that it is 100% effective. It just means that it's beneficial. And in fact, it is beneficial at every age above 6 months. Now, whether you choose to get it or not, that's a whole nother situation, but they just made that harder. And then, of course, that goes on and leads up to what I'm sure we'll discuss before long. Now they're mucking with the hepatitis B vaccine. And I can already tell you what's coming next year, probably one of the first ones that they're going to. So hepatitis B vaccine is actually a vaccine that can prevent cancer. Now, I
Mm.
think they're going to go after another vaccine that can cause cancer. So stay tuned to your show next year, because I am sure they're going to go after the HPV vaccine, which has almost virtually eliminated aggressive cervical cancer in women. But there you go.
So, Dr. Pate, let's fast forward to June of 25. There were more worries about bird flu, and we learned about a new threat to cattle. It's the new world screwworm, which prompted a halt to livestock imports from Mexico. So, give us a quick overview of screwworm and why it was dangerous.
Yeah, we had a problem in the United States, but eliminated that back in the 1960s. And so, as a credit to our U.S. Agriculture Department, they detected that there were cases of this New World screwworm turning up in cattle in Mexico and Central America that it could potentially be cattle that would end up, coming into the United States. So they put a halt to that while they began to put in measures to eliminate that threat so that they could keep it out of the United States. Screwworm is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not really a worm. It's maggots of a parasitic fly. Now, I will admit, maggots look like worms. They wiggle and they don't have legs, but those are really larvae of flies. And what happens is that any small cuts or abrasions on cattle, like if they get up against barbed wire or that kind of thing where they might get scratched or something, these flies will go in and deposit their eggs where that wound is. And then these maggots that hatch from the eggs, they do like a screw. And they look kind of like worms, so they burrow in deep, and then it can even cause death in the cattle, but it can certainly cause them to become very, very ill. And so it was a major threat. This was an example where public health from the United States worked, and that's why we need to preserve it and not tear it down.
Okay, so after that, June also saw more controversy, Dr. Pate, as the federal government removed its recommendation for healthy pregnant women, and you mentioned this, to receive COVID-19 vaccines. And then the federal government canceled funding for the development of a bird flu vaccine. And RFK decided to remove all members of the CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee at that time as well. So then we get to August, and Health and Human Services was pulling $500 million in funding from 22 mRNA vaccine projects that target COVID-19, as well as the flu and other respiratory viruses. So, Dr. Pate, how important is that kind of research money to fight these viruses? And I would reckon that they've pulled that funding because of how politicized COVID-19 got versus other respiratory viruses and even the flu.
Yes, absolutely. They are. The problem is what they're wanting to spend dollars researching things that we already know the answers to. We have decades of data and experience, and they want to spend their waste of time studying that. This, you're correct. This is totally politically motivated. Let's take the flu season right now. So you and I talked about the flu virus, that it went through a significant number of mutations and changes. If we wanted to modify the flu vaccine to be prepared for a change such as that, the only technology we have today that would be quick enough before it was over would be the mRNA technology. They are essentially eliminating that potential. You mentioned the avian influenza. And as you know, for several years now, you and I have been talking about the concerns that every time we've had a pandemic in the last century, it's generally started with an avian influenza virus. And probably our only timely, effective vaccine response we could make to a pandemic like that, which I have explained before why there's a very good chance if that happened, it really would be affecting our children even more severely than what
Mhm.
COVID did. And yet, it would eliminate that option. So we're going to be less prepared. Also, at a time when we're finding out that there are other benefits of these vaccines, how they may be used in cancer therapy, treating certain other disorders. And unfortunately, that is not being uh, um, committed to research. And that's exactly what we need research dollars to be going to. So it's a really it's just for political gain, and it only makes us more vulnerable and weakens our ability to make more medical advances.
So let's talk about Alzheimer's as well, because in June and August, we saw some headlines about Alzheimer's research. We saw a possible herpes Alzheimer's link, and then a new study that looked at a possible key to the disease. And this is the effects of Alzheimer's and dementia, which is too often overlooked for some of the more dramatic headlines. But these, Dr. Pate, I mean, they're devastating illnesses, and they impact millions of people. They impact their families in America every single day. So first, remind us of this link between Alzheimer's and dementia, because you did a whole blog post on this earlier this year. But are we any closer to understanding how Alzheimer's works and possibly some prevention?
I think we are closer. I don't think we have the whole answer at this point. But Gemma, you're quite right. The Alzheimer's is a devastating disease for many older people. It is the main cause of dementia, but there are a number of different potential diseases that can cause dementia. And there are certainly concerns that this is going to be an increasing public health burden on our country in the years to come. And but there has been a lot of research, and I think that it's been difficult understanding Alzheimer's because it is not just one thing causing it. It is probably a complex set of interactions between some degree of genetic predisposition, but also we have been accumulating more and more evidence that a number of neurologic diseases may be the consequence of chronic inflammation. And in fact, we've seen evidence that you and I have discussed on shows earlier this year of the fact that certain vaccines can greatly reduce your risk, like the shingles vaccine for dementia. And it may have to do with this chronic inflammation. It may be that just as we found that Epstein-Barr virus plays a causative role in multiple sclerosis, and we found that a pegavirus it plays a role in Parkinson's disease. It may be that it could be the combination of genetic predisposition and certain viral or other infections that cause this inflammation. But we know that it results in accumulation of abnormal proteins outside of the nerve cells and inside of the nerve cells. And then those nerve cells can't talk to each other as effectively. And eventually, those nerve cells die. So we are finding more and more ways to go after those particular problems. And in fact, it's possible that mRNA vaccines could be of help. There's some initial research suggesting it might play a role in helping us with this. But again, we're not investing in this kind of research anymore. But I think that is going to go on worldwide. And I think we are getting closer and closer to understanding and potentially having measures to help this devastating disease.
So, Dr. Pate, by August, we learned of a rabies outbreak in Wyoming, but we also found out about another GLP-1 medication. This time, a pill was announced by Eli Lilly. I want to stop right here and I want to talk about these medications, Dr. Pate, which have both been helping people tremendously, but also causing controversy. And the use of this drug has really expanded. So, let's first talk about these medications themselves. They have been around for, I believe, upwards of 20 years, first starting out to help with controlling diabetes. Then researchers started noticing other things that these medications were helping with. So, can we start the conversation there?
Absolutely. So these medications have been, I would say, transformative in that they have offered us as physicians and our patients options that really we haven't had anything quite like them, and either in the nature of how they act, nor in the success in helping control certain diseases and helping people lose weight. Now, as you said, this is not a cure-all, and therefore there is some controversy. One is these drugs are typically very expensive, and there are many insurance plans that do not cover them, and so certainly there's that issue. There are issues where they have been abused by people that really don't need them or have an indication for them, yet are able to
Mhm.
get them through back channels and so forth. But the biggest concern that's come forward most recently is they are so effective that not only will you lose fat weight, but you will lose muscle weight too. And we have to be very careful that people who are using it for diabetes, for weight loss, that they're not just relying on this medication. Although it has many, many benefits, it doesn't replace eating healthy, exercising. And in fact,
Mhm.
exercising is really critical to help prevent that loss of muscle mass that could then
Mhm.
make the people actually more weak, more prone to injury, those kinds of bad things that we don't want.
And I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle on this, Dr. Pate, right? Is that I think some of the controversy, first off, is there's this idea that that obesity is not a chronic disease, right? And that, hey, you just don't have enough self-control. I can tell you, having had two parents who struggled with obesity their entire adult lives, that they tried everything. I mean, everything under the sun, they tried. It is not a matter of willpower. I would argue with anyone that someone who is still struggling with their weight probably has more willpower than the majority of people. Um,
Yeah.
so I'd like you to comment on that because I think that is where so much of the controversy comes from. But also what you said too about needing to make sure that you are living a healthy lifestyle, regardless of whether you're on this medication or not.
Well, you're exactly right, Gemma. And it is terrible that it's only been more recently that we've been able to prove that really obesity is a disease. I mean, we can show that your cells reprogram if you're obese to think that is the weight they should work to maintain. And so anybody who has been challenged by being overweight knows maybe they're getting married, they want to lose some pounds, they can do that temporarily, but then
Mhm.
it comes back. And we've all heard about the yo-yo diets. We all know people that have certainly tried various things, whether it's the various protein drink diets or all kinds of fad diets or even surgery. But then later, that weight can start coming back, and it's because it is a disease. And so, what the answer is, it's we certainly, like you said, it's not shaming people, saying if you only had more willpower, or if you would just exercise control. It's far more complicated than that. On the other hand, there are no quick fixes. There's no
Mhm.
magic pill or magic shot you've got to do things in a combination, which means you do have to be addressing your stress and mental health, because stress makes all of us less attentive to our personal health. You have to try to eat a better, more healthy diet, and you need to exercise. And the exercise is really very critical. We're finding that, especially as you think about how much of the day we spend sitting, either at
Hmm.
work, on our computers, on our iPhones, whatever. And that is very dangerous for your health. You need to get up and move, and have a number of those episodes spread out throughout the day where you get up and actively move and engage, exercise. That's going to help get you the best health.
And bottom line is this: there was a survey by Gallup National Health and Wellbeing Index that came out earlier this year that noted that the obesity rate in the United States, which we know has been rising over the years, actually dropped to 37% of US adults this year. That was down from 40% just 3 years ago, Dr. Pate. And the survey said, it was due in most part to people using these GLP-1 medications. So it is showing progress in the fact that hopefully people are getting healthier, which, there's a domino effect, right? The healthier people are, I mean, our insurance goes down, right? There are all kinds of benefits to even people that are not on these medications.
Exactly. And, so for example, we now can tie, at my last count, 8 different cancers to obesity. If and so many of us were excited about a MAHA agenda where we're really going to look to make America healthy. Unfortunately, the way that the administration is doing it is going to make us less healthy. We really wish
Mhm.
there was a focus on these kind of things: research on obesity, research on new uses for vaccines, cancer prevention. You and I have talked about the increase in incidence of cancers among young people. There's lots of areas where we could really focus our research into how to make people healthier, but we're not doing that. And so your points are very well taken.
So then in August, there was growing concern over our nation's infant mortality rate, Dr. Pate. And in September, a new study came out and it found that childhood vaccination rates across the United States are slipping. And then President Trump said there was a link between Tylenol use in pregnancy and autism. And Dr. Pate, I know you talked about this briefly in the beginning of our conversation, but so many of these headlines that we are now seeing and these decisions that are coming out of Health and Human Services are around children and children's health. Can you talk a little bit more about this? Because I think that also goes back to your point about this movement of MAHA, where I think everyone wants our citizens to be healthier, but it seems like we're backsliding.
Absolutely. And those of us that are in the medical field, especially, my colleagues, my age and older, we know what these diseases were like and could be. Excuse me. And we don't want to see them return. And to think that we have the highest public health official spreading absolutely verifiable disinformation about certain vaccines, such as polio vaccine has killed more people than polio has, which is a totally baseless assertion and ridiculous. But these are the things that frighten us, that we're going to go back to this situation where we make it so some or a lot of these vaccines are not available. And now we're going to start seeing children with diseases that most parents don't realize how terrible a disease that is. I doubt that there is a single parent listening to this show, Gemma, your age or younger, that has ever
Mhm.
seen a child die from from diphtheria or
Hmm.
from tetanus. And they, and so they've gotten lulled to thinking, why are we giving so many vaccines to our children when we know, first of all, it's safe, that giving the number of vaccines we do is not causing a problem. We know that. And second, the reason we give more vaccines is science has advanced, and more of these previously devastating infections we can now prevent, but we're going backwards.
Well, and Dr. Pate, I think you're so right that I mean there are so many of these diseases where I mean I had to look them up. I had to look up diphtheria just to even know what that was, and I wonder if vaccines have been a victim of their own success.
Well, I think they have. And, for example, I can tell you back when I was in practice, it was very common for at our hospitals where I was, for several children to be admitted every day with a very severe infection that often caused meningitis. Um, and and so the pediatricians and the hospice were dealing with those cases every single day. Most hospitals haven't seen a case of that in years because we have an effective vaccine for it. Now, so even, and this is where people get into some misguided thinking because they think, oh, well, this particular disease doesn't kill a lot of children. You need to understand there are more things that happen that are bad than just whether your child dies or not. And of course, we don't want them to die, but getting meningitis, that is not good. Maybe that is the kind of thing that sets you up for the neuroinflammation that we just talked about with certain neurologic conditions that they may face later in life. We don't know, but we're getting more and more evidence to suggest these are not harmless events. And of course, having any child in the hospital, in the intensive care unit, it is psychologically harmful to the child and to the parents. So, why don't we want to prevent these things? Why would we ever allow them to return when we have decades of experience where we can say that the cure is much better than the disease?
Mm. So let's move forward to October. This is when we learned about a major medical breakthrough offering some hope for families who are battling Huntington's disease. And then there were new cases of Mpox in California. And Dr. Pate, this strain was more serious than what we had seen before. So talk about this strain of Mpox and its spread this year.
Yeah, I tell you, Mpox has been maybe one of the most surprising illnesses to me of all. It used to be called monkeypox. That's what the M is for. And this was a disease that really just transmitted in Africa. But what we saw in the middle of 2022 was a worldwide outbreak of this virus, and it's the first and only example that I can think of where the transmission mode, the way that the virus transmits, drastically changed. And whereas before in Africa, it was largely transmitted by touch and contact, we saw this spread worldwide through sexual contact, which it was just really quite surprising to me. And then what happened, like you said, we saw a more severe type of mpox emerge more recently. And then just very recently, we have now seen that two forms of the mpox have kind of merged together and formed a new strain, if you will. So I think the big lesson here, I will often talk to my colleagues who will say, we don't need to worry about this particular disease, it doesn't have a lot of pandemic potential. It's basically limited in Africa, and the transmission is this and that. And I think that is going to be generally true, but we need to learn to be a little bit more humble and realize that we shouldn't probably take any of these diseases for granted, because we have seen how really drastically Mpox would have shocked any of the experts as to what happened with that.
Mhm. So let's get to October. Idaho's new Medical Freedom Act had public health experts concerned. Dr. Pate, can you talk about this and its repercussions?
Yes, this is very worrisome. Again, was an obvious play to a political base, but a law that weakens our public health infrastructure, our ability to respond to the next pandemic, and raises a lot of question about what we can and can't do just in terms of managing exposures to our children in school, or to adults at work, for other contagious diseases that I can't imagine anybody wants to get, like tuberculosis and so forth. But this law enacted some of the broadest bans um, on any kind of public health measures that would be required for employees, for students, in most businesses, most government branches, and most schools. And so it's just, I understand people have a lot of anger or upset feelings about how the pandemic was handled. Frankly, I think overall, Governor Little deserves high marks. I don't think it was oppressive here in Idaho, yet because of the outrage, legislature has, I think, overreacted with this law that now is going to handicap the next governor and our public health department in a potential health situation where really the people, it wouldn't be controversial. People want something done about it, but we've just taken away most of our options.
So, Dr. Pate, let's move into November. Last month, we saw whooping cough cases on the rise across the country. We saw them here locally. We also learned that 31 babies across the United States have been hospitalized because of a botulism outbreak. And in fact, one baby was hospitalized in Ada County because of this. Can you talk about that outbreak, which was linked to an infant baby formula?
Yes. Infants are particularly susceptible to botulism. Botulism is caused by a toxin that's produced by a bacteria that can contaminate foods. Most common risk we see is when infants under the age of 1 are given honey, because these bacterial spores can contaminate the honey. That is kind of the biggest area of risk, and why we advise parents not to give your child at that age honey. But it can be baby formula, and that was what this case was. And so the spores contaminate the baby food. The baby ingests the baby food. The bacteria gets into the gut. It produces this toxin, and then the baby can develop life-threatening botulism. And praise God, as far as I know, none of I think it's more than 30 some infants who got botulism. I think because everybody was alerted to the risk, I think those children have gotten care, and I'm not aware that any of the children have died. Praise God.
hmm So, Dr. Pate, this month, and when we started the program today talking a little bit about this, but I want to go more in depth in our last minutes together. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention changed its recommendations for when to give babies the hepatitis B vaccine. Can we wrap up with your thoughts on what you're worried about in regards to this recommendation, but also when politics and medicine collide, which seems like it's been happening more and more since the pandemic?
Yes, and I think this is a great example of that. This decision was not driven by science. This was driven by ideology, by politics, and it's clear when you look to see how the CDC experts were largely excluded from the discussion, who the very unqualified people were that were brought in to give presentations to try to influence the panel and support making this decision. But this decision is not science based at all. And really, what it does is it disrupts, it's the beginning, I believe, of the effort to totally disrupt the childhood vaccination schedule. And they started with hepatitis B because I imagine, because frankly, it's the hardest one for parents to understand because it is
Mm,
complicated. Parents and the public widely believes that hepatitis B is transmitted by being sexually promiscuous or using IV drugs and abusing them. And certainly that those are two major transmission mechanisms in adults, but that's not how it's transmitted in babies. And so parents don't understand, wait, my young child is not going to be having sex, not going to be shooting up drugs.
hmm
Why do I have to give hepatitis vaccine? And the reason is infants are exposed to hepatitis B in a completely different way, either at the time of delivery from their mothers who might be infected, or from household contacts that might be infected, or from other people involved in the care of the child. And the thing is that half of the people that are infected with hepatitis B don't know it because they don't have symptoms yet. And yet, if an infant gets infected, the by the time we realize it, that this disease will be well underway, almost 90% of those infants will end up with chronic liver disease. So you are shortening
mm,
that child's life. You are putting them at risk for liver cancer. You're putting them at risk for cirrhosis. And their change to the immunization schedule, which is something we've been using since the 80s or 91, I believe, and it works fine. It's not been a problem, but it's going to mean now that more children will go unvaccinated, and it just causes more of this doubt among people that are here. Wait, is there something to be worried about with this vaccine when we have no safety concerns about it? And the fact that a lot of the vaccine manufacturers have made combination vaccines so that we give children fewer shots, which makes it really disruptive when you say, okay, we're going to move the hepatitis B. Well, it's not that easy. It affects the whole cascade of vaccines. So I think this was just the opening move. I think it's going to get worse next year, and they're going to
mm.
continue to undermine childhood vaccine schedule.
Well, Dr. Pate, we so appreciate you and your willingness to provide the medical knowledge and the facts every week for our listeners. We also know, Dr. Pate, that it has been an incredibly difficult year for you personally, and so we just wanted to say thank you for all that you do.
Oh, that means so much to me. Thank you. It has indeed been the most difficult year of my life. Thank you.
Well, and we thank you because we should let all of our listeners know Dr. Pate does this without any compensation. Seriously, he shows up every single week, all of the research that he does, all the time that he takes to inform us. So we are so incredibly appreciative of everything he does for us every week. And of course, as we go into 2026, Dr. Pate will be joining us every Wednesday as well. And as always, if you have a public health question, you have a medical question, maybe there's something that you've read about that you would like to know more information about when it comes to public health, send us an email, Idaho Matters at boisestate.edu, and we will do our very best to get those questions answered. But again, such a big thank you to Dr. Pate. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudet.
Looking for another podcast to listen to? Check out The Nature of Idaho from our partner station KISU in Eastern Idaho. Join hosts Peter Pruitt and Dr. Leif Tapanilla as they share fascinating stories from the Gem State's great outdoors, celebrating Idaho's wildlife, landscape, and natural wonders. That's The Nature of Idaho from KISU. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.